BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. And in this episode, we will be doing the Catch the Killer edition. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. So in addition to discussing the book How to Catch a Killer by Katherine Ramsland, I will also be looking at the film review for the movie Badlands, which the Zodiac referenced in 1974. The review with it was done by Ross Geraci over on Planet X Filmworks. If you haven't subscribed to Planet X Filmworks, I highly recommend it. Ross has lots of great Zodiac Killer content, and I'll also be responding to your questions and comments. But first, I would like to let you guys know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. To begin with this episode, lots of people have questions about the Zodiac Killer mystery, but almost all of them are in relation to solving it. How do we actually identify the Zodiac Killer from the 1960s and possibly 70s? And in this one, I'd like to go through the writings of Dr. Katherine Ramsland, someone who has been in the media a lot over the last 2 years because of her connections to the Bryan Kohberger case. But Katherine Ramsland is a very prolific writer. She has authored 59 books, and one of them is called How to Catch a Killer. And in this book, she explores this exact concept. How do you catch a serial killer? And this book has divided the methodologies that have been used to catch serial killers into 5 categories: forensic innovation, police procedure, mistakes and miscalculations, witness reports, and self-surrender. So, how do we catch the Zodiac Killer? I mean, what is most likely going to happen if we are going to identify the Zodiac? And what are the practical methods? What are the probable methods? What are the improbable methods that someone can use to actually try and identify the Zodiac? I was very surprised to learn from this book, again according to Dr. Ramsland's research, that only 20% of serial killers are caught because of brilliant detective work, because somebody had the right insights or the right instincts, and they just were able to get a certain type of idea that would lead them to the killer, and they would follow the evidence and the clues. Only 20% of crimes are solved like that, specifically related to serial killers. And also, only 20% of crimes are solved because of major mistakes that have been made by the killer. Now, I just mentioned Bryan Kohberger because Dr. Ramsland has been in the news in connection to the Bryan Kohberger case. He was one of her students. He was not a serial killer. He was a mass killer. He most likely would have gone on to become a serial killer, but he left a knife sheath behind at the crime scene. That is a very clear example of leaving a mistake that led to the killer being caught. With the Zodiac Killer, he was much more methodical, and also, the Zodiac took way fewer risks. I mean, it's so obvious because the Zodiac Killer also committed crimes by knife, like the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the murders of Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, or the stabbing of Brian Hartnell and the murder of Cecilia Shepard. Brian, of course, survived. But the Zodiac didn't stab them until they were incapacitated, until they were tied up, and they were unable to defend themselves. There's no chance that they were going to pull off the knife sheath. And the Zodiac also made sure that the knife sheath was secured because he double-checked Brian Hartnell's restraints, so Brian Hartnell couldn't sneak out of them and grab anything. So this really goes to show that the Zodiac Killer of the 1960s was extremely methodical. And in terms of leaving evidence behind, he left behind shell casings. He definitely did that. He left behind fingerprints or partial fingerprints, particularly on Paul Stine's cab. And of course, there are going to be fingerprints on his letters, such as the Little List letter that he wrote in 1970 that has loads of fingerprints. But as far as mistakes, the Zodiac really did not leave a lot of mistakes. He didn't make a lot of mistakes, and he didn't leave a lot of evidence behind. And I do not think that that was an accident. I do not think that the Zodiac Killer is just making this up, that he's just impulsive. I think that he really planned something. We're going to come back to that later on in the Catch the Killer edition of this show. But then also about like how do we catch the killer? As far as witness reports go, and like statements from witnesses that can generate clues, that really is only about 10% of the crimes. Only 10% of serial killers are caught because of witnesses. As we have also seen in the Zodiac Killer mystery, multiple people saw the Zodiac Killer on the night of the Stine murder. After the Zodiac Killer shot Paul Stine, he was witnessed by Lindsay and Rebecca Robbins, and they provided the details for the famous composite sketch. He was witnessed by Officer Donald Falk and Eric Selms, and the 8-year-old from Jackson Street. Who knows how many people actually saw the Zodiac Killer on October 11th of 1969? But only 10% of serial killers are caught because of information from witness statements. Now, self-surrender means turning themselves in. How many serial killers turn themselves in? And I don't think it means something about committing a crime in a sloppy way so that they get caught on purpose. I think it genuinely means somebody walking into the police station, confessing, and this person actually being the killer. This one is extremely low. Again, according to Dr. Ramsland's research, only 2.3% of individuals are caught because they were self-surrendering, because they're turning themselves in. It's been 56 years since the Zodiac Killer committed his crime spree in the 1960s, as well as, of course, writing the letters and the ciphers. So he has not turned himself in, and most likely he will not. Now, you might be noticing something, and you guys know that I'm not a math person, but we have these numbers here, 20, 20, 10, 2.3. That should only total up to 52.3%. Did I do that one right? I hope I did that one right. I'm not good at math. But that would mean that how are serial killers truly caught? Forensic innovation. And that's exactly what it states in the book. Then that's going to be 47.7% of serial killers are caught because of advancement in forensic sciences. But as we've already said, the Zodiac really wasn't very sloppy when it came to leaving evidence behind, and I do not think that that's an accident. I really think the Zodiac did not want to handle the victims extensively, with the exception of Paul Stine. That just means less contact, less evidence, less potential for DNA, although everything has been contaminated so horribly in the Zodiac Killer mystery. So many mistakes and errors by the police and law enforcement. There have been so many opportunities to preserve the evidence that just simply have gone unprotected. It's absolutely saddening. But that's how we would do this type of breakdown. Forensic innovation would get 47.7%, police procedure 20%, mistakes and miscalculation 20%, witnesses 10%, and self-surrender 2.3%. So there's about a 20% chance that somebody can figure this out, and I'm even going to extend this to armchair detectives and armchair sleuths, because there are so many more people out there who are armchair detectives who are trying to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I just say more power to you. And even if probability is against you, I still believe wholeheartedly that somebody will be able to try and connect the dots in their own way, in the right way, and actually lead to the Zodiac Killer's identity. But please share anything you want in the comments section down below. But because this is the Catch the Killer edition I also want to look at a different resource, and these writings were not coming from Dr. Katherine Ramsland, but from Dr. Ann Burgess, who appeared on a program called I Catch Killers. I found it by chance, and it turned out to be very fortunate. Dr. Ann Burgess has also appeared a lot on shows like Court TV, as well as on podcasts like Surviving the Survivor, and she's another very accomplished forensic psychologist and writer. And she said something that was very insightful in regards to how serial killers operate. And that is that with serial killers who have writings, who leave behind writings, like the Zodiac killer, right? Writing his letters and the ciphers and his threats, there is a very, very formulaic plan that happens. In fact, they even call this the steps to murder. And that is that usually it starts with a grudge. The serial killer has some type of grudge against someone or some entity or some agency, and he tries to find like-minded people. That's the second one. Trying to find people who have a similar grudge. Then he does research. He's trying to learn as much as he can about some type of justification for his grudge, justification for his ill feeling, and then he chooses a date, and then he starts planning, meaning that he is not going to just jump into something without really thinking it through. He is going to choose the date, say, okay, December 20th, 1968, this is when I'm going to commit my first crime. Now I need to find out exactly how I'm going to do it. I'm going to find out exactly how I'm going to drive away. I'm going to find out exactly what steps I'm going to be taking. What am I going to be anticipating? And then he is just going to follow this plan where it's going to go grudge, outreach, research, date, and planning. So I think that this is something that can provide a little bit of insight. Firstly, I just want to ask you guys in the comments section, what is the grudge of the Zodiac killer? What is the grudge? Who is he mad at? Is it just heterosexual animosity? The first Zodiac crime was the Lake Herman Road murders, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Lover's Lane killing, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, Lover's Lane killing, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, Lover's Lane killing. Was his grudge just against other couples? Was he just the sad, lonely man who thought, you know what, I can't get what I want in life, so I'm really jealous and envious and mad at other people, so I'm just going to put this plan into action? Now, that could be something. That should not, though, tie into anything associated with outreach. Who really would the Zodiac have any type of outreach with? Well, if you have a suspect like Paul Doer or Troy Houghton, then your suspect might be connected to an organization like the Minutemen. Sam Fisher has also talked about his suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin, being connected to the neo-Nazis or right-wing movements. Something to that effect. But a lot of people really don't see that aspect in the Zodiac killer case. They think that the Zodiac is acting in a type of lone wolf behavior. They also seem to think that everything that the Zodiac is doing is for himself. And I mostly agree with that, because when the Zodiac killer is writing out his letters, he's not saying that he's doing it on behalf of anybody else. He's saying that he's doing it for his own personal benefit. He wants to kill people. Why? Why does the Zodiac want to kill people? It's a thrilling experience. It's better than getting your rocks off with a girl. And it's also, it's something that will allow him to have slaves in the afterlife. He'll die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves. He will also be able to get attention. We see this very big shift in the Zodiac killer's persona and activities over the course of the previous, it's over the course of the 12 months when he is writing the letter, starting in July of 1969 and then going into 1970. At first, he's like, I want to kill people, so I will have slaves in the afterlife and have slaves in paradise. Then he's like, okay, well, just please pay attention to me, and please just wear my Zodiac buttons, and please wear nice Zodiac buttons. And he's just shifting into this ridiculous and borderline stupid attention seeker. So that should also provide some type of insight into how the Zodiac is operating. Now, does he have a grudge? Everything that I'm seeing about this would indicate that the grudge is just against society, maybe heterosexual animosity. That could be. That is what I would call a defendable position. But mostly, I would think that the grudge is against against people who are just living normal lives, and he feels like he is excluded for some type of reason, no matter what your theory is. One killer, two killers, hoax theory. I think that there is this driving element where the Zodiac is just trying to prove that he is big, powerful, and tough. But what do you think? Who do you think that the Zodiac had the grudge with? And do you think the Zodiac was part of any organization? As you can tell from my little segment there, I am mostly leaning toward the Zodiac being a lone wolf. Everything in his writings indicates that he is a lone wolf. He states that he's a lone wolf, even when he's talking about committing acts that are involving things like detonating a bomb and targeting school children. He says that he is the only participant and the only one who is going to be committing crimes like that. So, what do you think about any of these operations? Now, as far as planning and choosing the dates, absolutely, absolutely. I lean more and more toward this. For a very long time, I thought that the Lake Herman Road murders were just purely impulsive. That it's the concept of how a serial killer just has the first crime that is unplanned. He's just driving down the road. He saw two teenagers in a vulnerable place, so he just shot them. And that still might be what happened. It's an unsolved case. But I definitely lean more and more toward the Zodiac planning this out, choosing the date, and then he has mapped everything out. Even if it's not something like where he's literally plotting the exact course on the map where he's going to drive, he's mapped it out in his mind. I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, and everything comes to fruition. Bear in mind that these observations were made about serial killers who create their own sets of writings and mail them in. And if you're curious about the sample sizes that were used in this, with Dr. Ann Burgess, she used a sample of 23 serial killers who followed this exact plan, which they called the steps to murder. And with Dr. Katherine Ramsland's book, How to Catch a Killer, the sample size was actually 300. She looked at 300 serial killers, and this is how they were captured, and that provided the breakdown that I was talking about at the beginning. And when I first heard the 300 number, I thought that that was incredibly small. I mean 300, like how on earth would we be able to know that this is going to be accurate data that is going to represent all serial killers? I mean, does it account for cross-cultural variants and so on, serial killers in China, Russia, and the United States? But if I remember some things back from the university days, the reason why they have reliability with these sample sizes is normally they would start out with like 30, like any sort of case, 30, and then 100, and then 1,000, 10,000. Did I say 10,000? 100, then 300. And if there are the same percentages that have been divided up from, let's say, 50 to 100 to 300, then you have somewhat of a reliable correlation, and you have somewhat of some honest data that you can work, and predictive data that you can work with. Now, that could be something that is a little bit far out, or that could be something that's actually providing a lot of insight. But how do we catch the Zodiac Killer? It's going to be done with new advancements in forensic sciences, and this does not have to be DNA, but DNA has revolutionized the forensic sciences. I don't even need to mention the Golden State Killer or the Long Island serial killer. You guys already know all about those stories. But what a lot of people have been asking me is, do you think that the Zodiac Killer can be caught with AI? And I'm actually leaning much more toward that. Like, if you were to have AI scanning people's letters and articles and things that have been written, things like word choice and grammatical structures, and if you were just to have all of this organized on electronic systems, and then you could find somebody who had an identical writing style to that of the Zodiac Killer, absolutely, I think AI could do something like that. But what I think is so much more interesting is that these observations happened well before AI. I mean, Micro Deli was talking about this in the 90s when he said, I want to see if the Zodiac Killer was writing letters to the newspaper under his real name, not only under this name, the Zodiac. And he landed on the Zodiac Killer suspect, Shel Cavalli. Please share anything you want in the comments section down below. And one more time, you can like and subscribe. And I also want to be very honest with you guys. I would just want to talk to the listeners of Black Box Online Radio right now. This is an episode where I'm going solo, but I've been putting out several interviews over the last few months where I've been talking to various people about their ideas in regards to the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I just wanted to say that I'm reading your feedback, and I can see what you guys are saying. And a lot of people have some questions about the guests that I've had on the program. And I want to let you know that for the future of Black Box Online Radio, I'm going to try and have more guests, more interviews, but I'm also going to do something that I haven't done in the past, and that is refine the guest list, because I can see what you guys are saying in response to some of my guests, and you're like, well, we don't really want to hear from a person with this type of background. And also, in the past, I've allowed anybody to come on the show. You can have any suspect as long as the person is not a proven fraud, something like that. But really, you guys don't seem to want to hear too much from someone if you think their material is not reliable or credible, or there isn't a lot of depth to their observations. And I'm in talks with, people from the Zodiac Killer research communities, asking them to come on the show. And I also want to do it in a different way because for a very long time now, you've had the opportunity to listen to me talk to guests about the Zodiac Killer, but we're going to do this in a different format. We're going to create a type of true crime debate segment for Zodiac Monday, as well as the other shows here on Black Box Online Radio. And again, people can come on the show, debate their suspects, as opposed to just presenting their information and having me ask questions for clarification. We can have real debates. Sometimes it will be one-on-one. Sometimes it will be two-on-one. And this will be a new segment called the Zodiac Killer Hot Seat. And I have to give credit to Chad Burke for coining that term and providing me with the suggestion. So if there's anybody that you would like to see in a true crime debate, please put your idea in the comments section down below. And it doesn't only have to be Zodiac related, because on Tuesdays I talk about JonBenet Ramsey, on Wednesdays about Jack the Ripper, on Thursday about the Black Dahlia, and on Friday about T.B. Cooper. But this is Zodiac Monday right now. If you guys have any ideas for some future guests, you can put them in the comments section down below. And I think adding the debate segment is going to be something that will allow us to explore the contrast in ideas, because that's what I think you guys are really wanting to hear from my previous guests. In the past, I've always wanted this to be a welcoming program where somebody is allowed to present their ideas, and I'm not just going to be shouting over them and telling them that they're wrong. I've never wanted to run a YouTube channel like that. But I think by creating this type of Zodiac Killer hot seat, then we can actually challenge the ideas in a very respectful and fair and honest way. And I've already written up some rules and criteria for this type of debate format. So once again, if you have any ideas for future episodes and any guests that you would like on, any combinations of guests, like you would like to see me moderate the debate and then have two different guests debating their sides of the issues, then that is purely welcome. But I also want to say that I do miss the panel discussion show that we used to do on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, which was hosted by Jerome from Belgium. And somebody asked me if I would be willing to host the panel show where there would just be 4 or 5 guests and we're just talking about the Zodiac Killer. And I wouldn't be opposed to that, but there are a couple YouTube channels now that are going to be starting their own panel shows. One of them will be called Zodiac Theory. And mostly, I think we need both, to be honest. We need like a panel show where we can all just talk openly and freely, again with like 4 or 5, maybe 6 participants. And then we can also have these types of one-on-one or two-on-one conversations where we would have like something like the interviews and the debates. Because on Zodiac Monday, if someone puts out a new Zodiac Killer book, they're welcome to come on here and I can talk to them. And if they want their ideas challenged, we can bring on a third participant and they can genuinely have some type of back and forth exchange of ideas. I think that this is a strong point. I think this is a weak point. And I'm really looking forward to doing this because it's going to be exploring the information in a completely different way. But let me know your feedback in the comments section down below. And also, feel free to check out any of the new content here on Black Box Online Radio for the other shows that I've mentioned. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 says, have a productive week. Oh, I'm trying my best, Batman. And in addition to the lineup, I also put out shorts Monday through Friday here on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I got banned from TikTok, of course, for talking about serial killers, but they're short episodes that mostly focus on serial killers, true crime news, and any subject under the sun or in the darkness. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support, and I do mean that. And of course we have CZ Guy. CZ Guy is also a regular and consistent supporter. You three have been absolutely amazing for everything that you've done every single week for Black Box Online Radio for so long, mind you. Batman66, River Prawn Pottery, and CZ Guy. But we actually do have another regular and consistent supporter who shows up very frequently, and her name is Classic Chevy Cat, who has contributed on buymeacoffee.com. Classic Chevy Cat is also a very frequent supporter. And Classic Chevy Cat says, Ned, you present some of the most interesting, comprehensive, and thoughtful shows. Most of them make me walk away pondering, even if the crimes aren't my favorites to hear about. Bravo, thank you, God bless. By the way, take the time and enjoy life with your fiancé. It's so important. We're trying our best, Classic Chevy Cat. But as far as some of the content out there that is, hard to accept, I've noticed that Classic Chevy Cat has said that a lot about the Jack the Ripper episodes. Jack the Ripper was way more vicious than the Zodiac Killer. I mean, when you're just constantly dealing with these stories of people cutting out women's organs and so on, mutilating them because of some weird type of sexual fetish, it is sickening and horrifying. But then I ended up adding the Black Dahlia segment for Thursday, which is like that except even worse. Very, very gruesome stuff. But when I started a true crime channel, I should have known that I would be getting into this stuff. And I always said that if we're going to learn about psychology and history and human behavior, we have to learn everything, not just the warm and fuzzy parts. But thank you so much to everyone who has left donations on buymeacoffee.com, as well as with the super thanks on YouTube. And moving on now, I would like to talk about the movie Badlands from 1973, as well as some ads that ran in 1974. There is a movie review on Planet X Filmworks, which is hosted by Ross Geraci, and he was talking about this because in 1974, somebody mailed the Badlands card, also known as the Citizen card, and it's the one that begins with Sirs. It uses the word consternation, and it's signed a citizen. Now, longtime listeners of Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday will note that I have been talking a lot about the Badlands card, but because Ross did the movie review, I think there are a few things that we can discuss. Firstly, I was a much bigger fan of the movie Badlands than he was. I saw it about a year and a half ago, and it stars Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. It's based on the Starkweather Fugate murders from the 1950s. What was it? 1957-58. It starts in December and then goes into January, which was more or less a giant set of spree killings committed by Charlie Starkweather. And he's on the run with his girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate. And they've made numerous movies about this. And this is even discussed in the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses by Jeremy Berthiaume, when he talks about some of the nationwide coverage and how this was a true crime case that almost everyone in the country knew about. And it's really expanded into a lot of films, such as Badlands, as we've been talking about, as well as Natural Born Killers, California with Brad Pitt and David Duchovny, and Murder in the Heartland, which is another one that I've talked to you about on Zodiac Monday, and even the movie Starkweather. So it's some very fertile ground for filmmakers, and it got like an 8.9 out of 10 on one of the websites. I think it was IMDb, they said. And I wouldn't rate it that high. I would probably give it about an 8, because I was purely entertained when I was watching the movie Badlands. I was completely engaged, and it seems like Ross Geraci was a little bit more disappointed with the film. But to talk about something that's very relevant to that of the Zodiac Killer, I think that this has to deal with the perception that is shared in the Citizen card. And that's when the person who wrote this is saying that that it's poor taste to run ads for the movie Badlands with the blurb. In 1959, most people were killing time. Kit and Holly were killing people. The names of the characters were changed for the movie. They're not Charlie and Carol. Their names are Kit and Holly. Martin Sheen played Kit, and Sissy Spacek played Holly. Kit and Holly were killing people. And it's just saying that the glorification of violence is never justifiable, and that they need to cut the ad. Now, if this were the Zodiac Killer, this would definitely be some type of satirical joke or some type of satirical remark, because the Zodiac, of course, was a serial killer. But why did the Zodiac write this? And, I mean, like, we're talking about the authenticity of it. I have to give a shout out to Druzer in the comments section, because I frequently have referred to the Badlands card as inauthentic, and he said that it has been authenticated by law enforcement, and that it's just that certain Zodiac sleuths do not believe that it was authentic. I think there's a very, very high chance that this is from the killer. Same handwriting. It also ties into the Zodiac's 1974 movie feel. But even Dion Walker was in Ross's live chat and said that it was determined by the FBI to be a most probable match, something to that effect. Firstly, you can always respond, do you think the Zodiac wrote the Badlands card? It's an ongoing discussion that we've been having. But a lot of people believe that the Zodiac wrote this because he was dealing with some type of frustration for the portrayal of Martin Sheen as a killer, that Martin Sheen is just this attractive individual who looks like James Dean in the movie, and that's how they describe him. And he's getting all of this popular attention. And in the film, Badlands, he's not depicted as a loser. He's depicted as a cool person, and everybody is just friendly with him. And this is one of the statements from Ross and his co-host on Planet X Filmworks. He also had a girl with him, Holly, Sissy Spacek's character, and she is compliant. They use that word. Excellent word to use. So this is an example of somebody, like, say, for example, what if the Zodiac's grudge is heterosexual animosity, and he can't form relationships? Or maybe he couldn't form relationships before 1974, and then there's just this depiction of a murderer who gets lots of positive attention, who gets a girl, and the girl stays with him and just goes along on this giant, horrendous killing spree, and she's just sort of like, oh, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, and also she was escaping a bad home life. I mean, they even talked about how the father in the movie killed her dog to teach her a lesson, but they are together. This is the type of union and connection that some people have, and I mean, I totally see where this is going. I totally understand why the Zodiac could be frustrated with this, but one of you guys in the comment section left a very insightful comment, and that was, do you think that the Zodiac actually intended this to be a like Zodiac letter, or was he trying to write to the press and sneak it in with his without his name? The Zodiac wrote the Badlands card on a blank postcard, or somebody wrote the Badlands card on a blank postcard, blank on the front, blank on the back. It has a Samuel Adams stamp, and it also just has absolutely nothing Zodiac related. Is that a far out thing to say? The Badlands card does not have any Zodiac related features. There's no cross circle sign off, there's no body count, there's no Me37 SFPD0, there are no like numerical clues, -13 +100. There's none of that. There's no flying V symbol. If there were a flying V symbol on the front of the postcard, I would just say, yeah, this is the Zodiac pretending to be the Zodiac. I might even say that there's a 100% chance that this card actually came from the killer. But the fact that there is nothing of the sort there, well, I mean, I really started to think that perhaps that is a more viable theory and a more plausible outcome, that the Zodiac killer might have written this and pretended to just be an ordinary citizen, and he didn't think anybody would recognize the handwriting. Now, if he were to do that, what's the counterpoint? That would be a very, very ignorant thing for the Zodiac to do, and I do mean that. Ignorant for the following reason. Because the Zodiac could have done things that would have been so much easier. How about use a typewriter? If he doesn't want to have the handwriting traced back to the Zodiac killer, and he wants it to stand alone as an anonymous person, as an anonymous citizen, why use handwriting at all? Especially if his handwriting is extremely recognizable. But I have to look at the facts. We have similar handwriting. We have more advanced verbiage, more advanced word choices, but I mean, this person also had trouble with spelling. They crossed out the word consternation at the beginning, and not to mention the Zodiac's affinity for putting people on the stamps, like Sam Adams, also maybe using some other famous people on the stamps in the past. And the fact that it's on a blank card, I really begin to think that there's a much higher chance that this could actually be from the killer, and that he's pretending to be an ordinary citizen, that he didn't even want people to think that this was a Zodiac communication. Let me know what you think about that. Is that a completely far off statement? Did the Zodiac try to pretend to be an anonymous citizen and write something else? Now, this is where the AI stuff would come in. This is what Mike Rodelli was talking about. Maybe this individual wrote letters to the newspapers under his own name. Maybe he did it anonymously. And if you were to use AI, it would be able to make assessments of this. But I will provide one challenge. I will provide one very important condition, because a lot of people are doing this, right? I've talked to you guys about multiple individuals who have put in their data into AI for different true crime cases, even the Amy Bradley case. And sometimes the results are very questionable. Sometimes AI is giving just a very wacky result because AI can pull from things that are unreliable sources. You would have to refine the sample results. And, Dr. Katherine Ramsland is very good at that. Dr. Ann Burgess is very good at that, but AI is not. It's just going to take with the Amy Bradley case, it's taking rumors and speculative statements, and they're counting that as things that should be counted as genuine pieces of evidence to evaluate. But if it's unconfirmed, I mean, it's going to be something that we would really, really have to truly vet. And I don't think that AI has been vetted. ChatGPT has not been vetted. It's the same thing as just putting something into Google and you get a bunch of results. Well, maybe this result is actually coming from something that's dealing with the real source material, and this result is coming with something that is only internet rumors. So if you were just to view those as comparable and say that they're the exact same in terms of value, that would be an untrue statement. You can do that. I can do that. Dr. Katherine Ramsland can do that. But in terms of AI, they might ignore that completely. And as I've said, I've seen this in multiple true crime cases during my time with BBOR over the last 12 months. But let me know what you think about that and put your ideas in the comment section down below. And I would like to continue today's episode with a challenge question that was sent into the Instagram page, blackboxonlineradio on Instagram. And this one comes to us from Rich, who says, "Hi Ned, something just twigged. The phone call that was made after the Blue Rock Springs shooting said they were shot with a 9mm Luger. Surely you would say I shot them with a 9mm Luger. Might be nothing, might be discussed before." Well, firstly, Rich, thank you so much for this question that was sent in to blackboxonlineradio on Instagram. Now, what's the Zodiac Killer doing? After the Blue Rock Springs shooting, he shoots Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau at approximately 11:55 on July 4th. Then he disappears for about 35 to 40 minutes. At 12:40 a.m. on July 5th of 1969, he makes the phone call, and he says the famous, "If you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, you'll find 2 kids that were shot at the public park with a 9mm Luger. I'm the one who did it. I also killed those kids last year." And according to the transcribed statement, it's they were shot with a 9mm Luger. I'm the one who did it. I also killed those kids last year. And the famous goodbye. All right. Why wouldn't he say, I shot them with a 9mm Luger? Now, here's a possibility. Maybe he did. The phone calls were not recorded, and Nancy Slover was the dispatcher that took the phone call. It's possible that perhaps she didn't remember correctly or she didn't hear it correctly. But what I think, what Rich is saying makes me think that the caller was not the shooter. Now, this is going into something that ventures on what we call the thrill kill club theory, where it's almost like you have one mastermind, and then you have different criminals that are committing the crimes, or even if there's a letter writer and a killer, there's a letter writer and a murderer, and this person's also making the phone call. But I would actually turn to longtime BBOR listener Rick Hansen, who actually challenged somebody on this, just in the comment section like anybody else. And it wasn't in regards to the Blue Rock Springs call. It was in regards to the Lake Berryessa stabbing call, where he says, I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. And somebody said, hey, wait a second. How did he know that only one victim was going to die? He says, I want to report a murder. Then he hesitates and says, a double murder. And Rick Hansen was saying, nope. There is nothing incorrect about his statement. There is nothing inaccurate about his statement. I want to report a murder, no a double murder. Meaning he thought that he had killed both people. Hey, I killed one person. No, wait, actually I killed two people. That's what the Zodiac could have believed at the time. So that might indicate that Brian Hartnell was supposed to die. To all of the people out there who think that Brian Hartnell was intended to survive the Lake Berryessa stabbing, that might be quite improbable. And I also have to, be in the exact same boat when it comes to the Blue Rock Springs shooting. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. Now, it could be that Rich's suspicion is completely spot on, but as Rick Hansen would say, there's nothing incorrect about his statement. There is nothing inaccurate about his statement. They were shot with a 9mm Luger by me. So I think that it's perhaps a linguistic choice. And then we also have another question from Rich here when he says, I know he said I also killed those kids last year, but I've always had a bit of doubt about that anyway. Looking forward to Monday and happy weekend. Thank you so much, Rich. And it's a very good insight because it shows that people are paying attention to what the Zodiac is saying, and they're paying attention to how the Zodiac would have used his words. And, I mean, Jerome was even talking about this on the panel show last year when he said, if you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway to the public park, you'll find two kids in a brown car that they were shot with a 9mm Luger. I think I got it better that time. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. And I think that that was something that Jerome was saying where he's like, why didn't he say Blue Rock Springs Park? If he lived in Vallejo, like many people think that the Zodiac did, why wouldn't he just say, oh, I was at Blue Rock Springs Park and I shot two kids? In short, it seems like the Zodiac does have some very awkward word choices in both of his phone calls. But I have a follow-up from the last 2 weeks of episodes. Now, over the last 2 weeks, I was not doing Zodiac Killer news reports. I was interviewing Tim Spencer, who's the author of 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified, and his Zodiac Killer suspect is named Edward Wayne Edwards. And he brought up something about how he has a theory that Ed Edwards committed the Lake Herman Road murders because he was trying to vilify and frame another Montana convict named Frank Dryman Valentine. Both Ed Edwards and Frank Dryman spent time in Deer Lodge Prison in Montana. Dryman was paroled and went to Vallejo in January of '69, but Ed Edwards could have caught wind that Dryman was paroled in December of '68, but he wasn't released from prison until 1969, so he committed the Lake Herman Road murders as a way to frame Dryman, because he didn't particularly like them. And I have two responses. So many people have been sending this to me and saying, Ned, what's up with this guy Tim Spencer? If he had a problem with Frank Dryman Valentine, if Ed Edwards had a problem with Frank Dryman Valentine, why not just kill Frank Dryman and Valentine? Why kill David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen and then just go on and try and blame it on him? He could have just murdered Frank Dryman, tracked him down in Vallejo, and shot him. Clearly he has no problem committing murder, and Ed Edwards was a real serial killer. And to be as fair as I can, I would just say that maybe he was thinking that prison was a worse punishment than death, in Tim Spencer's theory, but I completely see your point. And there are a lot of steps that you have to take mentally to connect all of those dots. But Tim Spencer and I were discussing one particular thing in the interview, and this relates to how there was the phone call that came after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and it's everything that you just heard. And I was asking him, well, if you think the Zodiac Killer, all right, committed this botched frame-up in December of 1968, and then he's just going to create his own serial killer persona in 1969, and then just do this for attention, the way the Zodiac said in the papers, Why not say this is the Zodiac speaking during the phone calls if he wants attention, wants to spread publicity about the persona? And Tim Spencer said something to the effect of, well, Ned, when was the first time the Zodiac used his name Zodiac? And I said August 1969. And the phone call came in July of 1969. Tim Spencer is completely correct that the Zodiac had not made his debut yet. So if he calls Nancy Slover and says, this is the Zodiac speaking, if you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, all right, I see your point. Why would he say this is the Zodiac speaking? Nobody knew who the Zodiac was yet. Fair point. But after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, everybody knew who the Zodiac was. He had made the debut. He even left the Zodiac symbol on the car door at Lake Berryessa. But more importantly, he had announced himself by name in the letters. Why didn't he say the Zodiac in the phone calls? This is one thing that shocked me the most. Back when I was watching America's Most Wanted as a kid, I could almost even see it in my mind, the Zodiac picking up the phone and making the phone calls. This is the Zodiac speaking. If you go 1 mile east. It's almost a Mandela effect in some ways that I'm seeing the Zodiac saying that this is the Zodiac speaking over the phone. I was shocked that he didn't say that in the phone call transcripts. But I think the most honest answer is that the Zodiac did that because he was just preparing his lines. Once again, I don't think we're dealing with somebody who is just throwing things together very roughly. I do not think that the Zodiac just went up to those payphones and made the calls and he had no idea what he was going to say. When did the Blue Rock Springs shooting occur? As I said, 11:55 to midnight, July 4th. How much time did he have to think about it after the crime? 40 minutes, approximately. With the Lake Berryessa stabbing, how much time did the Zodiac have in between the end of the stabbing and the phone call? 1 hour and 10 minutes, approximately, which we can estimate from the time written on the car door at 6:30 p.m. to the phone call coming in at 7:40 p.m. And I think he was just working over the lines in his head over and over again. What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? What words do I need? What locations do I need? So he's more focused on the content of the phone calls rather than saying the name Zodiac. Maybe he also didn't want people to hear something about Zodiac over the phone and like someone who's, 20 meters away might be able to hear it, but I don't really think that that's the case. I just think that he was in his head thinking about, all right, what am I going to say? If you go 1 mile east, if you go 1 mile north, he's just trying to get all of the information correct. So he doesn't stutter, he doesn't stammer, he doesn't sound like a bumbling mess. If he just picked up the phone without saying anything, he would just be like, okay, now, so, oh crap, what was I supposed to, oh no, I don't know, some kind of public park has a problem. He would not want to do that because he wants to make the phone call as quickly as he can and get out of there. A twofold reason. It's being very tactical, but it's also making himself look tough. If he turned into a bumbling, stammering mess over the phone, nobody would take him seriously. And then they would just be depicting him as some type of weak, nervous kid in the media. Not only that, the Zodiac couldn't even spell kid. C-I-D is how he spelled it. So he would have just turned into some type of very, very self-destructive self-image. And I just don't think that's exactly what he was trying to avoid. But what do you know about that? What do you think about that? Why did the Zodiac killer not use the word Zodiac in the phone calls? Before Blue Rock Springs, everything Tim Spencer said is 100% correct. Everything he said is 100% accurate. But also, what do you think about my statement that he's just more focused on the content of the message that he's trying to say? This all comes back to Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Katherine Ramsland. We really have come full circle. What are they saying about, how are killers caught? Well, mostly innovations in forensic sciences. When forensic sciences become more advanced and they're able to use new methods that the killer didn't account for, because the Zodiac accounted for almost everything. He accounted for almost everything. He was smart in that regards. He was dumb in other things, and I do think that perhaps he was absolutely not the smartest person in the room all the time. It's fine. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room all the time, but the Zodiac maybe wanted to be, but he wasn't. He wasn't, and he also didn't receive a lot of attention. Even when they made the when they made the movie Badlands, he probably was really jealous of Martin Sheen. So when you look at this set of behaviors and activities, everything comes together now. The Zodiac did not leave behind a lot of evidence. He did not make a lot of mistakes. A lot of witnesses did not provide enough information about him to vilify him and identify him. He was wearing a mask at Lake Berryessa for a reason. And of course, he did not turn himself in. So that leaves us with two major points. How do we solve the Zodiac Killer mystery? Catch the Killer edition. Brilliant detective work on the part of you armchair sleuths who can connect the dots in the right way, and innovations in forensic sciences. So together, I mean, you have the 47% plus the 20% from brilliant detective work, 67% chance that that's how we're going to identify the Zodiac Killer. What do you guys think about anything that has been discussed in this episode? What do you think about Dr. Katherine Ramsland? What do you think about Dr. Ann Burgess? Share anything you want in the comments section down below. I would love to read it. And also, please give me some ideas that you want for future episodes. Who would you like to see in a true crime debate? And it's not going to be anything nasty. It's not going to be trash talk. I mean, we're really discussing this out. We're saying we don't want to just, say bad things about people who aren't present. It's really going to be about discussing the facts of the case and trying to challenge people in a reasonable manner. Please give your suggestions down below. You know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and the images from this program are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook, True Crime Designs. And you can also download this program for free at Spotify, Black Box Podcast. I almost said something else. And Spotify, Apple Podcasts. This show is on the podcast circuit under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And as always, blackboxned88 on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Goodbye.